In this video, you will learn about intervals. Not only the standard definition of what those intervals are, but also I'm going to show you some shortcuts, some very quick, simple way to learn chords in all 12 keys. It's going to be really helpful for you when transposing and being able to find the notes of the chords in any key whatsoever. You can get a free download of all the sheet music using this video from the link in the description below. If you're new to my channel, my name's Buster Birch. I've been playing professionally and teaching music for over 30 years. I've written and published a lot of music tuition books for different instruments which are available worldwide in print and for download. I also run online workshops and courses and have many hours of video lessons available on my website. Lots more free stuff on my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. So intervals, for me, they're the DNA code. They're the building blocks of how music works. And when I'm analysing and thinking about music, I think it's really helpful to think in intervals. Thinking in intervals enables me to transpose everything in all 12 keys. It helps me very quickly find the notes of chords and scales. I'm going to show you a little shortcut of how I do that, how I think and how I use the intervals to get my essential chords and my scales in all 12 keys. So this is a really useful thing to know. So an interval is the space between two notes. So essentially you have to have two notes to make an interval. It's like having a goal. You know, you need two goalposts and the goal is the bit in between them. You can't have an interval with one note. Okay, so you need two notes. Now, and then what traditionally what the interval is a label that we put on that space between the two notes. Is how we define that space. But this is where it can get confusing. As we've discovered in the other videos, notes can have more than one name. So you can pick a note, and I could play this note, and I could call that an E flat, or I could call it a D sharp. Now that's going to, depending on what how I define the actual two notes, that will affect how I define the interval. That will have an effect on what I call the interval. So what I'm really talking about here are the letters of the notes. Okay, so the primary definition, the primary classification of an interval is determined by the letters that you use to label the two notes. Okay. So if I'm using, there's only there's seven letters we use in the alphabet, right? So in Western music, the first seven letters of the alphabet. So for instance, if I'm going from C to G, that's a fifth, and the reason is because there's 5 letters involved. C. So we start. It's a bit like the American system of labeling hotel floors. In the UK, we have a ground floor. Then this is 1. Okay, and this is 2, 3. Ground, this would be the 4th floor, but in America they call it this is the 1st floor. The ground floor is the 1st floor, right? 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor, and that kind of this system follows that idea. So we count 1 as the first letter. So C, D, E, F, G. So C to G is a fifth. We call that a fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So if I go from D to F, D, E, F, that's a third. Whether it's a D flat or an F sharp or whatever, that's a third because I've involved 3 letters. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to understand. Then we can get into the detail of the space in terms of exactly how far it is, because that's not quite clear enough when we're talking thirds and fourths and fifths, because there are many different types of thirds and fourths and fifths. Okay, so let's go through this sheet here. I've written out all the most commonly used intervals, and I've also included some alternatives which you may or may not have come across. Okay, so like we can have like a note can have more than one name. Yeah, so as we've said, is it an E flat or is it a D sharp? And therefore the intervals can also have more than one name according to the choice of letters that we use. So we've already discussed the primary interval classification, which is determined by the use of the letters for the notes. So we can have a unison, means basically no interval. It's the same. Both notes are the same letter. Okay, that's when it's a unison. And you have seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and then an octave takes us up to the same letter, one octave up. Then within that, we can have different types of those intervals, okay? So this is where we're getting into the detail and the classification of the exact interval. Intervals can basically unisons, seconds, fourths and fifths are usually diminished, can be diminished or augmented, which means they're flattened or sharpened. So if you sharpen a fourth, fifth, unison or second, then you refer to it as augmented, and if you flatten it, it's referred to as diminished. The thirds and the sixths and sevenths we refer to as major and minor intervals, and that's if they're sharpened or flattened. And then if they have double sharps and double flats, then they become augmented and diminished. So this is just the language that we use to describe these things. There is a system there in place. It's not random, although it may seem it at first. So let's look at these intervals. So as we just said, the first interval, although technically it's not an interval, is a unison, which means we play the same note twice. So if the first note and the second note are the same note, we call that a unison. If the first note and the second note are a second apart, okay, we can have two different types of seconds. We can have a major second and a minor second. So if it's only one semitone, yeah, and we call that C to D flat. If we define that note as D flat, then that's a minor second. And if we define it, and if we go to D, C to D, that's a major second. So one semitone for a minor second, two semitones or a tone for a major second. Now this is where it gets interesting. So let's go back to the minor second. If we define this note as a D flat, it's a minor second from the C. But if we define it as a C sharp, then what we've got is an augmented unison. Very unlikely to come across that. But that's hence the asterisk in that column there. So do you understand? So it depends what letter we use to define the note, and that determines what we call the interval. You know, whether it's a minor second or an augmented unison. Okay, so major second. Technically, again, you could have if you had C to D, that would be a major second. If you called this note an E double flat, then you would have technically a diminished third, because you've gone from C to some type of E, so that gives you your third, and then it's a double flat E, so that's where you end up with this two semitones interval. But again, very unlikely to see that, but just for the purposes of being thorough, that's why I've included it. Of course, the next interval, three semitones, is often referred to as a minor third. So again, if we go from C, if we call this note E flat, then what we've got is a minor third. However, if we call it D sharp, then we've got an augmented second. This is starting to make sense, okay? So it depends what you call that note as to what interval you therefore refer to it. So major third is going up 4 semitones or 2 whole tones, yeah? Sometimes also, so if this is C to E, this is a major third. If we call this note F flat, if we call it F flat, then and we're going from a C to an F flat, then what we've got is a diminished fourth. Okay, again, unlikely to come across that very often. Usually referred to as a major third, most situations. Next interval, 5 semitones, is a perfect fourth. Again, that's assuming we define that as an F. So if we go C to F, it's a perfect fourth, because C, D, E, F is 4 notes. If we call this note E sharp, then we've only used 3 letters, C, D, E, so it's some type of a third, and that would be an augmented third, yeah? Because it's augmented, it's raised up from that third. So we've got an augmented third there. But most likely you're going to see that referred to as a perfect fourth. The next one, okay, very interesting, the old tritone there, and I've done a whole video on tritones, so do check that out. If we call this note F sharp, then what you've got there is an augmented fourth, yeah? And if you call this note a G flat, then what we've got is a diminished fifth, okay? So remember, fourths and fifths, they've only got to go up or down 1 to be augmented or diminished. Okay, augmented fourth if it's an F sharp, diminished fifth if it's a G flat. And I haven't put an asterisk on that because that's quite common actually. To a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth, you quite often could hear have a diminished fifth, obviously on a diminished chord. If you've got, yeah, then we refer to that as a diminished fifth. If we're going to play C7 sharp 11, in this case, I'm going to call that an F sharp, and I'm going to call that a sharp 4, sharp 11. Yeah? So that would be an augmented fourth. Okay, next interval is 7 semitones. Okay, 7 semitones now, and that is our perfect fifth. Our perfect fifth. Yeah. Technically, if you had an A double flat, then you could refer to that as a diminished sixth. Very unlikely, but that's possible. Next interval is 8 semitones, 4 whole tone. Okay, so this is the minor sixth. If we call this note A flat, and we're going from C to A flat, then that's a minor sixth. If we call this note G sharp, we're going to call this interval an augmented fifth. Okay, so same principle. Again, either are quite common there. Augmented fifth could be again sort of a sharp 5 diminished augmented chord there. Yeah, so C7 sharp 5. In that case, I would be referring to that as a G sharp. In which case, if I went from there to there, I'd be calling that an augmented fifth. Okay, next interval, 9 semitones, is my major sixth. So again, assuming we're calling this A, then it's a major sixth. If I have a B double flat, if this is my B double flat, then this is an interval of a diminished seventh. Okay, technically that could be either a major sixth or a diminished seventh. If it's a B double flat diminished seventh, as within the diminished chord. Yeah. Okay. And then my next interval is my minor seventh. So 10 semitones we're on now. 5 whole steps, 5 whole tones. So again, most likely you're going to refer to that as a B flat. So in which case, if it's a B flat, then that's a minor seventh. If we're going to use an A sharp, yeah, then this is an augmented sixth interval. So if this note is B flat, we've got a minor seventh interval. If this note is A sharp, we've got an augmented sixth interval. Nearly there. Major seventh interval. So 11 semitones now. Major seventh. So most of the time you're going to refer to that as a B. And this is a C. C to B, major seventh. On the rare occasion, you may refer to that as a C flat. So you're going from a C to a C flat, which is quite unusual. We would call that a diminished octave. Okay, and finally, C to C, that's our octave, 12 semitones or 6 whole tones. Okay, so those are the standard intervals, as you've probably heard them. Maybe not all of those classifications, but I hope you can see from that there is a logic to this. It may seem a little bit confusing at first, but just take your time, go through those, make sure you understand why all those notes, intervals are called what they are. It depends on what you call the note as to what you call the interval. And remember the seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths octaves. It's all down to the letters. So we use the letters, and then whether it's minor, major, augmented, diminished, will give us the actual classification of the interval. Now let's move on to something else, because I want to now show you something that I think is really helpful, particularly when you're getting started, for covering all your chords and your scales, and how you can use intervals to very quickly find the notes of a scale or a chord in any key. So this is the whole point of this. Knowing our intervals enables us to transpose very, very quickly. Okay, so let's move on to the next sheet now. You can get all these sheets in the download. Follow the link below. So I'm going to look at how we construct a minor triad. Okay, so starting with minor, why not? And what I've done here is I've written it out in a couple of different ways. Okay, just to sort of just to show you where we get the intervals from. So a minor triad is constructed from the first, third, and fifth notes of the minor scale. Yeah, and if we analyse the intervals, we can see that there's a 1.5 tone gap between 1 and 3, and a 2 tone gap between 3 and 5. This knowledge helps us to quickly and easily build a minor triad from any starting note. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at this scale. So I've written out the scale, the notes of the scale at the top here. And I've used a natural minor scale, which is the key signature of the minor key signature, the scale of the minor key signature. So if we're in C minor, C natural minor scale is C, D, E, F, G, A flat, B flat, C. Okay? So that's our scale. And what I've done is I've written in the intervals between each note of the scale. So C to D is a tone. That's what the T stands for. D to E flat is a semitone. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. So those are the intervals between each note of the scale. Now if I just take the root, the 1, the 3 and the 5, and there's my 1 again at the top. Okay. And then I analyse the intervals between those notes. What I can see is that between the 1 and the 3, I get 1.5 tones. Okay, so all I'm interested in now is the tones and semitones. Okay, so this is going to be a little shortcut. I'm not worried about calling that minor thirds or whatever like we did before. So I'm just literally looking at the finite actual space, yeah, which I'm only thinking in tones and semitones. So from there to there, 3 semitones, right? So 1.5 tones. Okay. Now my next note is here, and what I'll see is I can see that I've got 2 tones between here and here. Yeah, 4 semitones, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 2 tones. Yeah, so what I've got when I play this, and then from the 5th up to the root is actually 2.5 tones. Yeah, but this note is a repetition of this note, so I'm not worrying about that for now. I'm just going to look at my triad. So if I now stack those up vertically, as if I'm playing a chord, can you see now what I can do is I've got the root, the 3rd and the 5th, and what that gives me is a C, E flat, G, but actually what I'm really interested in is the intervals. So from the root, from the 1 to the 3 is 1.5 tones, and up to the 5th is 2 tones. And what that means is, if I remember that, I can start from any root note and I can apply those intervals and very quickly get the minor triad, okay, in any key in all 12 keys. It works every single time. So let's start on an F. So if we take an F, I go up 1.5 tones and then I go up 2 tones. There's my F minor triad, okay? It's an F minor triad because I've started on an F and I've just applied those 2 intervals, yeah? Let's try B. B, I go up 1.5 tones and I go up 2 tones. Okay, and what I get is a B minor triad. It works every single time. F sharp, I go up 1.5 tones and I go up 2 tones. So this is a very quick shortcut to finding the notes of your chords, okay, of your minor triads, okay? So practice that with different starting notes. Now let's move on. And what I've done next is I've done the same thing on a major triad, okay? And so I think you'll kind of get the idea of this. What you'll notice now is the major scale has a different sequence of intervals of tones and semitones, which you're probably aware of, know this already, but there'll be another whole video on scales and intervals. So if we start from C, we go up a tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's my sequence of intervals that gives me the notes of the major scale. Okay. Now, if I take away some of the notes and I just go for the root, the 3rd and the 5th of that scale, what I get is this. And now the intervals are in a slightly different order. So I've got 2 tones between the root and the 3rd because it's going out to a major 3rd. And then I've got 1.5 tones from the 3rd, the major 3rd, to the 5th. Okay, so again, if I stack those up vertically, now can you see how that works to get my chord? So starting from my root note, I go up 2 tones and I go up 1.5 tones, and what I get is a major triad. And I get that, I can do that in all 12 keys, in any key, in any starting note. Let's start on an A flat. Okay, if I go up 2 tones and then 1.5 tones, what I get is an A flat major triad. Let's start on C sharp, and I go up 2 tones and I go up 1.5 tones, I get a C sharp major triad. Any note, whatever note you start on, if whatever note is your 1, if you add those intervals, you'll get the triads, okay? So, you know, obviously you need to learn your triads and you need to know what the notes are, and gradually that will come. But I think when you're starting out, this is a really good way to be able to think quickly in all 12 keys. So I think if you can start to think of the what I call the DNA of how it works, if you understand that, you understand how these intervals generate and create these chords and scales, then you can find the notes in any key straight away. And most importantly, what you're doing is you're thinking differently, and there's a kind of beautiful logic and a system to this whole thing of music theory. And once you can understand that, then the rest of it's easy to work out. The way I was taught is like we literally just had to memorize all those scales, just parrot fashion, and I didn't understand at first, you know, this kind of beautiful logic, this sequence to it all. And I think if you know that first, then you can work out all the rest of the notes for yourself. And of course, you've got to practice it so that it becomes fluent and that you get quicker at it. But in the early stages, when you know, you can see why those notes are where they are, and so the intervals are great at doing that. Now let's push on. So we've just dealt with major and minor triads. Okay, so quite simple to start with. What I want to do now is I want to take that exact same principle, that same concept, that same theory, and apply it to some more complex chords. Okay, and you'll see it works every time, every single time. So now what I've done is now this is starting to look a bit like a sort of like chemistry chart. What do they call those charts with all the numbers and letters on it? You know what I mean. You know, the table, the table of the elements. Yeah. So don't panic. This may look a bit mathematical and all the rest of it, but again, when you learn, I think it's good to see the whole thing, and then you can see the patterns in there. And once you understand that this is a simple pattern that just repeats itself like wallpaper, then everything becomes easy, and there are no hard keys, right? There's just combinations, variations of the same thing. There's just 12 versions of everything. So what I've done here is I've gone through 3 of the most common chord symbols in jazz, because a lot of times people struggle to remember and memorize and learn all those chord symbols. So I think that having a system like this will really help you just when you're getting started, just so you can find the notes. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. We're going to look at major 7 chords. I've written all 12 out there on the top, in the top chart there. Okay, so and I've deliberately done them in this order because they go around the cycle of fourths. Okay, so it's a very good way to practice going around the cycle of fourths. That's why they follow that sequence. And I've written in bold, I've written what the notes are. So we're dealing with, so essentially we've done our triads, well, major and minor triads. You could do the same with diminished and augmented triads. But I would suggest actually the next thing you do is you work on some of these, you add some sevenths. Okay, so adding some sevenths gives you the three more common chords that we use in jazz. So we've got major 7th, we've got dominant 7th, and we've got minor 7th chords. Okay, very, very simple theory here to remember. So you've only got to remember a little thing, and you can apply that and generate all these chords. So let's start on C. We're going to play a C major 7 chord. So I'm looking at my chart here, the top chart. I'm going to play the root, and if I go up 2 tones, okay, I get this note, which is an E, and then I go up 1.5 tones. So there's the major triad that we already did. So we already know that one. And now all I'm going to do is add on 2 tones, and I get my major 7th. and that is my C major 7 chord. Okay, so whatever note I start on is my root. I go up 2 tones, 1.5 tones, 2 tones, and that's how I get my major 7 chord. Okay, so let's move that around. So the next thing around the cycle is F. So we're starting on F, and I go up 2 tones, I go up 1.5 tones, and I go up 2 tones, and I get my F major triad. So F major triad now starting on the F. Okay, let's do the B flat. So take my B flat, I go up 2 tones, I go up 1.5 tones, I go up 2 tones, and I get my B flat major triad, and so on. Can you see? And you can hear they're all the same. They're all the same chord types. Okay, they have the same quality, the same flavour, the same colour, however you like to think. So that's a really simple way to learn all of your major 7th chords. You only have to remember one thing, and then you apply that to all 12 variations. Instead of having to learn 12 things all just, you know, parrot fashion by rote without really understanding what's going on. Let's look at the dominant 7th chords now. So again, the exact same principle applies. Very, very simple. Let's just pull that up. So I'm on this middle chart now. So again, I've got all 12 keys there. I'm starting from C. I'm going around the cycle of fourths, and I've just got a different sequence of intervals. So this is why I talk about the DNA code, right? So my DNA code for major 7th chords is 2 tones, 1.5 tones, 2 tones. And my DNA code for dominant 7th chords is 2 tones, 1.5 tones, 1.5 tones. Okay, now if I start on any note and apply those intervals, I'll get that chord. So here we go, C, I go up 2 tones, I go up 1.5 tones, I go up 1.5 tones, and I get my C7 chord. Those are the notes of the C7 chord. Let's do another one. Let's start in the middle, F sharp. Let's start on an F sharp. Okay, so I go up 2 tones, I go up 1.5 tones, and I go up 1.5 tones, and I get my F sharp 7 chord. Okay, it's exactly the same for in every key. Let's do D7. Here we go. Start on a D, go up 2 tones, 1.5 tones, 1.5 tones. I get a D7 chord. Okay, so you've only got to remember one thing, and you can find the notes to all 12 keys. Okay, and finally, I'm just going to finish up with this. Obviously, now I think you get the idea, right? So you can apply this principle to every type of chord. I've just done the 3 most common chords: major 7, dominant 7th, minor 7th. But of course, you could do that with the half diminished. You could do it with diminished chords. You could do it with augmented chords. You could add the 9th, 11th, and 13th if you wanted to as well. Let's do the minor 7th chord. So we'll start on C again. Now it's a slightly different DNA code, so I go up 1.5 tones, I go up 2 tones, and I go up 1.5 tones. So that's my minor 7 chord. It's my C minor 7. Yeah. Okay, let's just pick one in the middle. So let's do A flat. So I start on an A flat, I go up 1.5 tones, I go up 2 tones, I go up 1.5 tones. And that's how I get my A flat minor 7 chord. Okay. So I hope you kind of get the idea of this. As I said, you can download these PDFs. You can get all the sheet music. Just click the link below, and you can get these charts. And I think what I'm trying to do here is make you see the patterns in music. There's a lot of and the piano's a great. Whatever instrument you play, the piano's a great instrument to study music at. Because, well, there's 2 reasons really. One is, you know, if I want a B flat, I just press that button. I don't have to sort of, struggle away to get a note. But the other thing that's really important about them and great about the piano is I can see the shapes. Okay, it's very clear. It's a very visual thing, which you don't, especially if you play a wind instrument. You're not kind of seeing the patterns laid out. And there's a lot of patterns in music, especially in music theory. Okay, I just think of it as like wallpaper, you know, where it gets repeated. And if you can understand what's going on with those intervals, and then you just repeat the pattern starting from a different note. That's how you learn all 12 keys, very simply. Okay, great. I hope that's helpful. And leave any comments below and get in touch if you've got any questions about that. Thanks very much. Take care.